the big challenge that John sees, that we see, John sees more than I do, is that there's a big difference between managing and developing a product and a project. And when we see people do things, they're acting like a dev manager. And this is lethal 99% of the time. They're focusing very hard on working on what you'll see are two big risks: technical risks and sometimes design risks. And the result is they don't even know it. They're making some really big bets. And we all know big bets fail big. They get their money and they just ended up hammering on the things they know, and they lose their money. And the big difference is you need to think about managing the overall project, not the product. And you need to act a little bit like the investment manager. You have to get your feet in the shoes of the person that in the end you're personifying, that's going to give you money, because you have to be a good custodian of resources and make sure you structure your project, how you do it. And John used the word prioritize. I'm going to use the word sequence what you do in a way so that you maximize the return on time, energy, effort, and all those good things. But what no one's told you is there are 6 kinds of risk that you need to deal with, and they've only given you tools for 1, maybe 2. Most people haven't. And so what are the examples? And the one that John talked about is the one that he hears a lot is, where are my sales? Let me go get funding, get me some money so that I can raise some money to go get my sales problem solved. And the situation usually is, and John, you can jump in if you have any color to add to this, but they're getting a lot of adoring, maybe confusing feedback, but they're not actually getting sales. They're not people buying, a lot of interaction. There's nothing that's really predictable. Growth isn't predictable. There isn't any consistent pattern. And I think he used a great term, popcorn success. And they're in there and they're talking with people who are really interested, but they're not actually closing the deals. And their assumption is, hey, give me some cash, I'll polish some things up and I'll go get some sales because I've got what it is. But the issue is they haven't addressed a really important risk, which is about value. Do they have value? And they're actually, when you really do a diagnostic and jump in, they're making the wrong thing. They're working with the wrong persona. They may not be even working for the right decision maker. And even if they're in the right market, they're talking to the wrong kind of person, not just role, but how they think. And guess what? This scares investors away. So the very thing they're looking for, they're not going to get because they're just doing the wrong things to get there. And investors are looking for these signals in value. That's what they want. They want the signal in value, not necessarily in technology, but it's about the value signal. And they've gone down a wrong path. And oftentimes they don't even know it. And that's what I'm going to spend some time talking about today. So the vision is you're building something that's compelling, not just viable, not just works, and you're selling it now. So you deliver a breakthrough concept quickly. So you get to cash quickly. And you can repeat it. You create compelling value that gives you a competitive advantage. And you can do it 4 times faster if you think about and focus on the issues that I'm going to talk about today. And you get some consistent revenue. So you can actually prove an ROI on your time and energy and prove to potential investors that you can govern their money. So they want to fund you. So you show that you can govern what resources you have. So imagine that you mitigate the biggest risk, that you have the value proposition right. And the very first risk you deal with is you mitigate it on this journey to delivering some compelling. So the value proposition risk is low. It may be imperfect, but it's not high. Even if you have the technology, often it's high. So investors see traction and they want to fund it. And so that's what you're trying to do, is getting something that's compelling value that will get traction. So as a preview, here's the 6 kinds of risk that my years at work have really helped teams think about what they're sequencing. Value risk, the team risk, funding, resources, usability, performance, and go-to-market. And we're going to look at this several times in the next few minutes. So don't feel like you've got to go through it all now. So what this presentation is how do you think about and mitigate these 6 killer risks? Because any one of them can kill you. They're all risks that cause projects to fail. So when John asked the question, what should you do now? It's really, what risk should you be working on? Which one you should be mitigating at this moment? And the answer is the top risk now. Which one is the one that's going to actually take your knees out and work on it? And what I'm going to talk about is a dynamic way to govern the challenges that you see that are constantly shifting in a dynamic market. So you can structure your project and show that you're a good governor of funds, and somebody will want to give you theirs to go farther. And again, the governance model, I call it, is top risk now, and you'll see the evidence of how that works. So I've already talked to you guys a little bit about the big bets fail, and you guys sometimes don't even know you're making them because you're just focusing on the technology. And the vision is that you max your efforts, money, time, by managing, delivering a high stakes project. And the challenge is you don't know how to pick and manage and focus on the right killer risk at the right time. But what I found was there's a group out there that did, and I harvested how they're successful. So I'm going to talk about how they did it and talk about the solution, the top risk now model. And then we'll talk about how we might use it. So there will be a next session that we'll talk about how we mitigate the biggest risk that people seem to fail on early stage in their projects. So before I go, are there any big questions people want to ask before I kind of start jumping into the details? Nope. Okay. So this segment we're going to talk today about governance is one that I've developed over the last decade through mostly hardcore research, a lot of cognitive research, a lot of big data analytics, looking at what succeeds. And what most teams have, and they're good at, is they have lean and agile. They understand it and they know how to build something, the how process. But they don't have the core methodology to answer the other questions that are important for any coherent story. Even Shakespeare, you need to know the what, why, who's, and hows. And the lean tells you how, and even asks the questions about who, why, and what. It doesn't give you the similar rigor. And so today, the 3 that I've put together that I call Market Fit Fast are about the risk we're going to talk today. Why are you doing something? And then we'll talk later about gateway adopters, of who you should target with a breakthrough concept. And then the what you build to be compelling. Today is about the top risk. So as we spoke of, you guys know big bets fail big. And most people have gone out and adopted lean and agile methodology with that best intention of saying, I don't want to bet big and fail big, but they don't have the knowledge that they have this methodology and it's only focused on one of the risks and they don't know the other ones. And so they have this unwitting Groundhog's Day effects where they keep doing the same thing. They keep working on those 2 risks and there's still big bets that fail big. And this is one of the things that John kind of came to me, is he sees people in this beginning stage who are really dutiful about the concept of lean and using agile to learn, but they're only working on one thing. And he keeps seeing this 99% failure rate. They're using lean and agile. And I think of it as a bit like somebody came along and gave you a powerful firearm. Lean is a great learning model. I love it. As an ex-engineer, the scientific methodology is the way I actually grew up in a household of engineers and scientists. But Agile is only one type of ammo for hitting the technical issues, but there are 6 targets in total, and that's but one of them. So what happens in high stakes projects. When you go out there and you look at, and what are the indicators that things are a little bit bad, not working out great. So there's a technical team, they got great functional tools, they know what they're doing, but they have a limited set. They're really good at one way to manage a product, not the whole project. And they've got a hammer, and you're gonna see that metaphor a lot, is they got a hammer and everything is a nail. So they're using the tools they have wrongly, in the wrong way, in the wrong sequence. And I also think, I grew up in a garage working on cars and motorcycles and things, and they're madly throwing awesome tools they've learned into the engine bay, hoping that some of that's going to fix it when they're trying to get something to work. But they don't have a manual for which tool they should use, when to stop using that tool, when to switch to another tool. And when they only have one and really only have the agile model, they just keep hammering with that faster. But typically they haven't found the market. They haven't found the right person in the market. And refining the technology isn't solving this. So again, they're acting like dev managers, and they're using the methodology they have for the wrong tool. It's not a nail, and they're still using a hammer. So they're using what they have. They don't know that there's 6 types of risks. So here's an example of the excuses that the CB Insights, they went out and asked a bunch of people to self-report, but notice the biggest issue, and why I spoke so much about value, is the reason something failed is no market need. Now, I would suggest running out of cash is just a symptom of not having a market need, not having the right team, other issues. They're not competitive because they're not valuable enough. There's a bunch of things that are wrapped up. And if you looked at hierarchy to nested these, you'd see there are really only a few themes that are here. And that's what the years of work I've been thinking about to help. But most they know, they just weren't solving something that's valuable. So I'm saying, cut the BS. There isn't a need. That's the biggest issue for most. And if there isn't a need for what you're trying to do, there isn't really any value. And so you have to think about the value, not the product. Again, don't be the product person, the dev person, be the project person. So this is the kind of detailed indicators that I see is, first, the teams do what they know. They craft and they code and they refine and they think about dependencies and they use agile and lean and they fail really fast. And maybe they use some design thinking and maybe they even give a nod to customer development, but they're not using that best tool very much. But they're getting this confusing feedback in the market. Why is it, quote, failing? Is it really failing? Are we talking to the right people? Is this really the right market? And we even heard some people on today's call talk a little bit about that, which is the right market. And then when you ask them the concept of, are you sequencing? What are you doing first? What are you doing second? What are you doing next? They go, oh, well, I'm developing. And the answer we hear when you ask them what they're doing is they're typically thinking about MVP and doing agile technology development. And to them, it all looks like a nail. And they're doing what they know and they're going to do it faster. So this is one of those things where they just dig the hole they're in quicker because that's the tool they have. They pound. And so when you ask that sequencing word, what? And they don't know when to stop wasting resources because that's not where they're going to get the best benefit. So polish. They're crafting, they're getting it better. It looks more robust. They're doing releases, but they're unwittingly on the agile big bet death march. They're refining and they're on a march that's just not going to get them because they don't know what to do about the other risks. They don't have the tools to fit them. And again, back to the different risks is there's value risk. Are you compelling? That's the first thing to the person who's likely to buy. Is the team have the skills? Do you have the resources? Can someone get the value out of it? It does. Now, notice it's the fourth one where I say, can it perform? And then how are you selling? What's your packaging, pricing, positioning? Will they buy it from you? Do you need a partner? So these are the general questions. And later I'm going to get into a little more detail about it to describe what does it really mean. So I'm going to talk about how you deliver success in a sequence. So this is how Top Risk now works and how I've been using it. Actually, I should say, be more clear. This is how I saw other people doing it, and they couldn't even tell me this is what they were doing until I kind of mimicked it back. And what I've been doing for the last 12 years on some big projects and small projects. The first thing I do is every sprint you're doing should be focused on mitigating your current biggest risk type. So when you start a project and when you hear the question that John asks, what are you doing now? The real question is, what's your biggest risk and what are you doing to mitigate it? So this is a project execution exercise. And the mechanics are that when you go into a planning or you're thinking about, you get the team together and say, what am I doing now? Your project is mitigating the biggest risk. And you find and use the tool that's best for that risk type. And again, the people that I talk to who use this instinctively is they're getting the maximum return on their effort. May not be money, maybe time, maybe a combination. And you go out and you use this risk mitigation expert as the learning experience to validate and refine and pivot the vision you have. And the key dynamic that these people had, the people who are not 95% failure, but 95% success, was they SATISFICE when they have reduced their risk enough. They never pound that nail into the ground. They sub-optimize. They don't sub-optimize. They never polish. They optimize for the entire system on how they're using rigor resources. A quote I would hear when I saw as an engineer, I saw a partially completed project was, look, it works. I have bigger fish to fry now. They would even get a little indignant about it when I kind of queried them as, hey, this is kind of messy, you know, and even would talk about technical debt and they go, and they just say, I get a better return somewhere else. Even if I fix that, it may not pay off. So they would move on to the next step. Once they said, okay, I have put projects together, a sequence of projects, I've reduced this risk. Now I need to move on and have a different goal in mind. So the first risk that I focus on, and maybe you have different projects and you could pick a different risk because you believe it's something else, just don't work on one of the small ones. But I focus on initially the value risk. Would a decision maker buy this thing? Would they think, yes, I'll write a check for that? On the funding, the question you ask and the risk you're mitigating is, do I have the resources to succeed? The team risk is, do I have the skills on the team to do what I need to do? Are they there? Are they not? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to fix that? The usability is about the link between the value promise you make and can it be realized? Because a lot of times there's a big disconnect, unlike the consumer space. And even in the consumer space, there's great cases that John can talk about. Education tools is his favorite, where can the value you talk about actually be realized in the usability risk? Then there's the performance. Does it perform? Is it compatible? And will somebody buy it from me, or who do they buy this thing from? What are they comfortable with? Pricing, packaging, messaging are all late. The reason that I put value so highly is you can look at all these others, but if someone doesn't say it's worth it and it has value compared to the other things I can do, working on any of these others is just a waste of resources. So if you pick one and you say, this is your top risk, and you push the others aside, this is one of the most valuable things you can do, is picking one and putting the others away and saying, I'm not getting distracted by things that will have a low ROI, then you do the great tool that is lean. You do a learning exercise to mitigate your value risk, creating a vision or hypothesis of what your value is, going out there and engaging the market to get a feedback on it, and synthesizing, refining, and pivoting what you're doing. So you use a lean model with a specific goal. You're giving the lean cycle a mission, and that mission has a risk mitigation metric and benchmark for success. There's lots of ways you can do this. This is a bit of a laundry list. You know, are you talking to the right buyer? Are you addressing their top goal? Are you addressing a challenge that's related to the goal so it actually matters? Are you using best of breed tools? You think about that, but you focus them on this value risk. And there's a similar set of questions and tool sets for each of those risk types. So this is the core of the learning. Now, I'm going to talk a little about this later, but I not only did hundreds of interviews to validate how these people did things differently and the people I harvested from, but I did a big chunk of research, hardcore quant research, and learned these statistically significant lessons. That first, you know your risks for your domain. And in the startup world, these are the ones that I've researched and validated. And yes, they're heavily nested. Each one has a lot of things underneath it, but it's a MECE list that allows you to look at those questions I said and say, I need to answer this question better than the answer I have today. Then you need the toolboxes. Agile is a great tool for the performance risk. Customer development and all the tools you use to do great interviews are about value. Go to market is definitely about marketing. There's the finance side. So each drawer, I think, again, grew up in a garage. I think of the 6 drawers and the tools I have in each of them. So you have a best of breed tool for each of those. And then, yes, you use the super valuable learning model. You now have a mission. You have a tool to use it in that lean experience. And use SATISFICE. And if anybody really wants to get into the hardcore, this is a theory of constraints model. You can do the research, but people that I talked to, regardless of what role they had that succeeded at these things, had this built into them. They didn't understand what I was talking about when I talked about theory of constraints, but it's what they were doing and how they satisficed the project to the point that it wasn't the biggest risk, and then they moved on to the next risk. So the combination of these tools is you ramp up your investment as your risks are decreased, because you pick the one that's the biggest and you use the best tool to mitigate it. You don't overinvest in it. You learn for the least amount of investment and time. So I think the typical sequence is you get your value risk understood, you use lean, then you think about the team that fits that value, you understand the financing and what you need to do, you look at the usability to realize the value, you look at performance and technology to deliver it, and then you think about the gateway go to market. At any time, the model can adapt to market realities, changes in strengths or weaknesses of the team, events, competition. You can resurface those, because every time you're making that assessment, I'm working on the biggest one, what really is the next biggest one that I will shift to? And so you're asking yourself that question. Well, and I came up with a vision for the Cloud API, Office 365 Cloud API, and I used what I learned from talking to Microsoft customers about what they needed, and helped drive that so they delivered value in one release. The head of engineering didn't want to do the project because he thought it was going to take 9 years to do it. And because we used the tools I've talked about today and sequenced what we did to focus on the right persona and did something compelling, it was seen as the most strategic API to Satya when he took over the job of CEO, and he said so publicly. And he went and when he took over the job, he audited everything. So let me talk a little bit about where I found this. So this is, where did this come from, right? What did I find? And I was out trying to find the person that leads the mass market, and those of you who are familiar with Crossing the Chasm, you'll see some familiarities, but also some twists. I was looking for the mainstream market leader, and I found them, and they were very, very unique. They helped transform cool new concepts into something that the mass market said, oh, that solves a problem. I'll use that. And that's why I found them. But what's unique about them is they had a really healthy relationship with risk. They weren't excited by it and running towards it like a crazy person, and they weren't running away from it in fear. They looked at it and studied it and had a relationship with it. And on the adopterness scale, they kind of sat in that chasm. They were the people that took lots of cool ideas and the ones that called that 85% of the nonsense out and adopted the 15% and 15% of stuff that did make it in the mass market. They're the ones that did it. And so I said, how do they do this? And there are two characteristics that I found that you could qualify anybody on this adopterness curve was, how did they know their risks? And then how did they pursue and manage them? And this group had a 95% success rate with their projects that were taking something that was nascent and making it work. So I asked myself the question, how? Now, I could answer this because I had 400,000 data points and I had hundreds of detailed interviews that were sometimes 2 hours long, looking into how they made decisions. So I could look at how this group differed from the rest. And this is how they thought. They were experts in their domain risk type. So whether it was an IT person or an artist or a dev, whoever it was, you'd ask them about their risk types and they tell you, I've got 8 kind of risks that could hit me. Never all of them, just there's either the ones that I think about. And they knew them and they could tell you what they were. And then their jewel was they had a full toolbox of mitigation tools that were the best of breed for each type. They might have a couple for each type of risk. And they were going in and they were constantly reassessing what was the very best tool, because they saw this as their secret sauce where they could take risks no one else can because they knew how to mitigate it. They knew how to do it in a way that they wouldn't fail. And so when they looked at a project that was going to help them reach their goal, they would look at the different risks and then they would tailor the project. They'd architect the project to deal with the different risk types. And they would know of the 8 they knew or the 10 they knew, they'd say, these 2 are big and then there's another one in there. They could immediately tell you, this is for this project, these are the things that are likely going to kill me. So then they would then look and make sure they knew the first one, the biggest one, and they knew the likely number 2. That's what they knew. And then they would create a project. Okay, we're going to go do a lean experience. We're going to do a project. We're going to go try something and we're going to go make this new thing work by just focusing on the one risk type. They would structure a learning experience. And in John's term, they would learn experiments to go mitigate the risk that was most likely going to kill them. And they did them cheap and fast. These weren't big investments. They wanted to mitigate the biggest risk the easiest time they had. They didn't go develop a whole project and see if someone would buy it. They would go mitigate some of that particular risk. So they'd go find that best tool and for that risk type. And they'd use it. And they'd get a hammer and they'd use that tool. But they would be very specific. They might start, if you're going to use the nail analogy, they might start the nail with a finishing hammer. Then they would get to a bigger hammer, framing hammer. Then they might hit it with something else. They would use each cycle, each swing of the hammer was not the same hammer. They would look in that best of breed toolbox and say, where am I? What's the right tool for hitting this risk now? And they were constantly looking about, okay, how does that compare? How does my risk that I'm mitigating compare to another one that I should be working on? So when it got lower, they would stop. And this is where, again, as an engineer, I'd look at what they were doing sometimes and go, this is a mess. And they go, no, I got other things to worry about. they would stop. They would know that now that it was no longer number one, they would end it and they would shift the focus to a whole direction for that project and work on a different kind of risk. And again, one of the best reactions why I said I was perplexed by this as an engineer when I was talking to them. It's like, no, I got bigger fish to fry. I will get back to the governance thing. I will get a better return on my investment of time in my team if I work on the thing that's easy to make a bigger dent in how this project succeeds. So they went from 90 success on the crazy stuff. They also had twice as much money, by the way. They had a long track record of success, and their organizations would fund them. That was one of the statistically significant findings of that 400,000 data points is they had twice the budget as everyone else in front of them on the curve and behind them on the curve. They had no big bets because every swing of the hammer was a mitigation opportunity and a pivot and a change opportunity. They had no big fails. And they didn't make any, they mitigated their biggest risk before they went and made bigger bets. So there was an inverse relationship where they would spend little bit of money at the beginning, and then they'd start ramping up their funding. So that was the big governance and how they got great returns on what they were doing. Any questions before I move on? I'm going to share an example next of a team that I helped that saw me in a previous life at Microsoft and asked me as a startup to help them.
Patrick, I have a question.
Yes.
So in this slide here, to the right, know your risk profile. Once you identify the biggest risk, you don't actually solve all that completely. You just solve it
enough.
As much as enough before you.
Yeah, that's why. Yep.
Okay.
So that's why I call it top risk now. You work on the top risk until it's no longer the top risk. You don't hammer the nail into the board. Because frankly, it takes way too much work and you get a better return on your efforts shifting to something else that's tall in a big issue.
So this is a practical application of the Pareto principle of spending effort on the 20% that gives you the 80% return. And then when you got the 80% return, stop and go do the next thing. Gives you another 20% of work to get the 80% return. So
by the way, I've been using this for a while. I had a client who asked me to help them. I did a little homework. I got into a C-suite conversation and I walked through 3 of their biggest risks in a 90-minute meeting. I went, okay, let's think this through. Boom, boom, boom. And we made some guesses. We took some models. We did some triage and we made market selections, persona selections, technology selections, and we walked through them really quick as a hypothesis, knowing how we were going to mitigate that or validate that hypothesis. And the chief marketing officer came to me and said, how did you do that? You did 6 months of work in 90 minutes. And I go, oh. And it was the first time I actually had to explain what I'm sharing with you guys today. But I'm not saying these have to be huge projects. You just have to mitigate that risk enough. And good thinking in a best of breed tool might do it in a few minutes. Maybe not. Maybe it's going to take a couple of weeks to go do the experiment. But it doesn't mean you have to invest a ton of time. You just have to know what it is and work on it till it's not the biggest. So let me share an example that was a startup.
How do you know in a startup when market risk or execution risk or team risk are the biggest one? How do you know which one is the biggest
one? So there's an art to that. And I, again, over the last 10 years have figured it out. So let me say the first thing. The first benefit of thinking this way is not working on the 4 or 5 that aren't your biggest risk. And you may wrestle with, well, I know this one or this one, and I don't know which. This is where you just do lean and you hit one of them and you realize it's not the bigger one. So fighting over whether it's the number 6 or number 2, when you know you're not working on the others, that's the most valuable lesson you could have from today. is I know the 6 and I know it's maybe one of these 2, and I'm just going to start working on it with a good tool, with a tool that gets a great return, not polished tool, a rough test, a sniff test, a something. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that a little later, or we can come back. But it's pretty surprising the number of times I've done this, and I lay out the questions that I shared with you earlier about which one of these is most likely going to get us. I rarely have a lot of argument, and there's some intuitive sessions, and we ask ourselves a question. If we did this now, would we, and this didn't go away, would we more likely fail if we did this one? And we just do a tournament on the top 2 and take a guess and say, well, let's work on it. And we'll just keep looking at the other one that we didn't do. And that's usually good enough.
So the classic thing that we see at the Angel Conference is somebody has an idea. They've seen a problem, real or imagined. They have a solution that popped into their head. They go find someone to build it, and they're working on building the solution.
Yeah,
and then
they've
we
already
say,
jumped.
Yes, they have. And we say, we think that your problem is you haven't done customer development, haven't done customer discovery because you have a market risk, and they won't run the experiment to do it. We've tried thousands and thousands of times to get people to do an experiment on customer discovery, and they are convinced that if they build it, that people will come engage with it. So how do you express the risks in a way that cause people to believe that they are not the exception to the rule, that more than half of the people fail because they have no customers?
So John,
well, I think that our next, go ahead.
In regards to what you were saying, to pursue customer discovery, and if you're trying to create a product, and if you don't have it yet, are you just asking people to see if they would even if they would buy what you want to make?
No, because you've already made the leap to a product.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, when I'm doing customer discovery, I want a list of people who share a problem and are willing to spend money to solve that problem. I didn't say anything about the solution. I'm just trying to find out, do they have a problem? What do they do now? Are they still willing to spend money to change what they do now? And if the answer to any of those questions is, no, I don't have a problem, no, what I've got works fine, no, I'm not willing to spend money even though I'm unhappy, then they are not customers. And so that's not a market. And so the offer that you're making is an offer to test the question, are you somebody who will spend money to solve this problem? Has nothing to do with the product, has nothing to do with what you think the solution should be. So what were you saying, Patrick, about explaining the different risks in a way that they can perceive?
So let me, let's see, how are we doing on time? We have 8 minutes. Well, first of all, you've invited me to come back in December. Oh, we have 2 hours. Oh, okay, great. All right. Why don't we do this? Why don't you let me finish to the last handful of slides, and then let's go back and I'll show you those colloquial characterizations of risk that help me have this discussion. And I have to say, most of the time when someone has been a dev manager type behavior and hammering MVP and it's not working for them, to lay out the other risks and say, do you know, blah, 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 they kind of go, oh, and you get a conversation going because you say there are other risks that you need to think about. This happens to be one of them, and you're hammering the heck out of that. When we have that conversation, it's been about a 60 to 70% successful. Not always. I can't always, the psychology of a startup person is different than the rest of the world. So I don't have a 100% success rate, but let me finish this and we can go back and talk about that dynamic. This is an example of someone who saw me help develop that valuable API for Microsoft. And they left the company about a year before I was thinking about it. And they had a game, and they had been focused on the users of the game. And they were doing very much MVP thinking. They were working very hard on the technology, and they were really thinking about the user experience, which was great. And they had been at it a year. They had another 9 months. But the team had a ton of disagreements on what they should be doing next. And they were really trying to get to a sponsorship situation, because this was a sponsored game that was out in the blogosphere, that was kind of linking together a theme across people who were Seahawks bloggers or Oscar bloggers. They had a game concept that was really quite entertaining. But they hadn't looked at the BDM. They hadn't looked at the person who was the blogger who decided to actually post this thing on their site. They had just thought about the game itself, not where it had to go. So I helped them think and rethink about that part of the product, and think about the blogger, and then what they valued, and came up with a set of metrics and success for, we think that this persona will think you're compelling if, basically you increase traffic. And so we had a 90-minute planning meeting where we said, this is our biggest risk. We need to think about what we're doing. We have to decide what we think is compelling to a blogger. And during that time, we used a methodology that develops what I call minimum compelling offering. It's a delighter thing. I presented to this community before. We can go back and surface it. But it got very clear about what they were doing that was unique in their competitive advantage versus the alternatives for a blogger. And what we revealed was these guys had 3 releases that was buried in this one they were going to take 9 months to deliver. And it was super simple to get something that was non-customized. What they had is a wildly customized vision. And they realized that if they took all the customization out, a bunch of security went away, a bunch of design work went away. And it was actually easier to adopt for a blogger. Again, they had been so focused on the user and not the blogger itself. And what we revealed is that first iteration could be done in 6 weeks, not 9 months. So something that was compelling to the blogger, instead of 9 months out, was 6 months out. And so we developed that concept, and literally that day after the planning meeting, and we came up with three versions, we had called the decision maker blogger, and something that we'll talk about next time is about the profile of that persona, the person most likely to adopt. And they said, yes, I would love that thing. We go, okay. And we delivered it in 6 weeks. They started having sponsorship conversations in 6 weeks. And then we looked at the second release that was a slightly more customized version of the vision that they had. It was not all the way to the end. It was kind of an intermediary customization. And we went out to the people who are now using the product, right? They had adopted it. They were using it. They had a few weeks under their belts. And we went out and said, hey, we'd like to get feedback on this next iteration and what the release will be. And we got putting it in kind words, why would you ever do that? So something that had been baked into their 9 months that was going to take 3 months. It turns out that the people most likely to adopt, the decision makers, didn't think that that roadmap had any value. So we killed basically a man-year of development work at the end of 6 weeks that was in that roadmap, because maybe it will be nice for the long term. Maybe it'll be nice for the mainstream market would like to have it, but the people who are most likely going to adopt early didn't think it was valuable. And so we moved right on and skipped over, like I said, about more than 3 months worth of work, or more than a third of that work. And again, the prototype was out, and we had started getting prototypes of MCO3, the final version. We started mocking them up and getting feedback. And so, and I would say one of the big benefits that I didn't understand immediately was the benefit to the team of getting something into market and getting real feedback from real users. They'd all been speculating. They're all on pins and needles. And when they had someone paying them for a product and they knew that it was working, it was a huge morale lift for the team. So that went really well. And it only took a few weeks to actually actually took a week to go from one of their focus to think about another focus, and then cut a ton of their time, because we looked at the value for the person making decision and validated what was compelling for them. So my push to you is, govern your project, again, across the whole project. You're not a dev manager. And I think this is part of the conversation, John, that goes into you're being a dev manager, not a project manager, when they're just worried about the technology. Understand the other 6 risks in the sequence that's best for your project, so you don't make big bets, you don't keep polishing. And again, you're following a proven model that works for people who constantly take and manage risks successfully. So back to the concept of market fit fast, today we focus very much on the fact that you guys know how to do lean, but there are some key decisions of who, what, and why. And we've spent time talking about the why, but the who and the what are still key issues that we can spend time today talking about a little bit. And we've set up time to do another round of this conversation and do a deep dive into which market and for whom. And the which market, by the way, very heavy on the concept of compelling, because in order to get cash flow, you look at, let's say you have 6 market choices, and John does you've surely heard his talk about, if you're gonna do an education app, are you doing it for a student, a teacher, a district, a parent, a grandparent? There's a whole bunch of decisions, and you wanna do something that's compelling to the persona you can do it the quickest, the least amount of dev work and investment, so you get somebody using it. So we'll have a little bit of that conversation. Again, we spent time on top risk now, and next time we'll talk about this. Why don't I pause and let me go back as part of John's initial conversation, which is the colloquial, here we go. When I sit down with my team and or with the team I'm working with, I talk about these questions to help them say, what is it? What's the biggest one? What's their biggest issue? And so, would a decision maker buy it? And then I look, you may have a great high performing item, but it doesn't matter if you can't answer this question. And some of these are gates to others. Having a great performing article when you can't answer the question, will someone want to buy it, just doesn't make sense. And I use these questions to get that conversation going. And, I'm not always successful, but most of the time I have been.
So one of the places that I succeed is we have a team, they're a bunch of coders, they're writing the code, but I don't know who the customer is really. And so I don't actually know that this skill set of this code is what I need to solve the problem for people. Maybe I need to actually be on a cloud service instead of on a mobile app, or whatever the issue is for that particular audience. And so having the team with the right skills depends on who's buying it and what value they're getting out of it. And so I'm able to peel it back a little bit there. But if I'm convinced that everything needs to be a mousetrap, then that's where I get stranded in the process. So how about if we go through and ask everyone here what they think they should do next? Deborah, that's you.
Again, John,
sounds good to me.
Ask everybody what? What was it?
On your project, you have an idea of an audience. and you have an idea of a product and you're trying to sell it and it's not selling like you want to sell it. So what are you going to do next?
I guess I can. Were you asking someone specific, or were you saying anyone could answer?
I was giving Deborah a hard time, actually.
Oh.
Yes, Harmon, you go now.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually have really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you, Patrick. Because like I was working on thinking about getting funding and stuff because that's what I just thought startups are supposed to do. But I actually, risk assessment wise, sorry, my video. Risk assessment wise, you know, I actually have enough for like the next 6 months or at least, if not a year. So that's probably not top of mind. And what I think I need to work on is, will it work? Because for, you know, one of my ideas, I want to do something that takes like Slack, Discord, or Microsoft Teams postings and puts them in whatever knowledge base that company is using, because they feel like their SEO and their forums are dying because everyone communicates in Slack and Discord. So, but I don't know how I would make that work. I know there's Slack bots and Discord bots. So I'd have to like research basically if that's easily possible, if a good user experience is possible, where if a customer comes in, posts an error message, a developer answers it, can we transfer that to their Confluence or to their you know, Stack Overflow or something.
So you believe that your biggest risk is a technical risk?
Yes.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
You don't believe that it's a market risk? Would they spend money on that?
Yeah. So I have spoken with some people that have mentioned that they need this, and I've seen like posts on Slack's Slack support forums where people are asking for this. Like, is there a way to take Slack messages and put it into Confluence or our forum or whatever it is? And because their SEO is kind of dying because no one goes to the forums anymore. Everyone wants to go quickly chat.
I didn't say whether they wanted it. I said that they would pay for it.
Yeah, I guess that's a different question. I should ask them, like, what would you pay for this then?
No. Pay me for it.
I'm sorry. Well,
so would you pay for it? Should you pay for it? Could you pay for it? All those would words are things that lead you down a rabbit hole, which give you bad information. So instead, ask them to do something that's a proxy for, would they spend money to solve the problem? So for example, you could run a workshop, you could run have a white paper, you could have a hackathon where each of those you charge money for, which proves that they care about this enough to spend money to solve the problem. Even if it's $25, come to our little hackathon and we're going to hack out a solution to this.
Gotcha.
Then you would know that they are leaning in, right?
So it's more.
But if you ask would, could, should, I could get you half of the people in this room to say, yeah, that's a great idea. You should do that. And the answer is none of them will pay you.
Yeah. So it's about doing the experiment is what you're saying. You have to do the experiment and
yes. Yeah. And let me offer what I typically do. John has offered a great experiment to see if at least you can find someone who's willing to pay for the problem. I typically find I have that methodology that I talk about, gateway adopters, and I go to them and I ask them, what are your top 3 goals? And what are the barriers that are getting in the way of getting to those goals? And if the thing that you want to provide doesn't fit in any of that space, you better question what you're doing. Because if they have so many problems that are bigger fish to fry for them, then you've got to wonder, maybe you can make an elegant solution. So let me tell the war story from that one. I told this story to somebody and said, yeah, I know someone who mortgaged their house, lost their house, created an awesome app. Everybody told him it was a problem. And they told him that the solution he created was awesome for running a restaurant. But when he went to market, he found that the problem is real, but it's number 10 or 12 on their list. And they have so much bigger issues to worry about. And so you have to make sure that idea, concept, solution is relevant to one of the biggest issues to them, or they're never going to spend the time to make a swap. It's just, there's not enough payoff there. They've got other fish to fry. And so finding the person that I think you need to find the gateway adopter, the person who has got a history of trying new stuff. And they're trying new stuff, and they have the skills to try new stuff. So you engage with them and you ask them that question. What are the outcomes you're seeking, and what are the things you're getting in the way? Because you message and position to the goal and you solve the barrier. And if you're not solving one of these things, helping them get to this goal, yeah, you got huge amount of risk.
But aren't you just asking questions again? This is would you? And John's saying it differently. John's saying do, not ask, not talk, but do something, that there's an action, preferably with money involved, because money kind of is the, when people put money up, they're putting their money where their mouth is. He's saying don't do lots of talking. Go do something that's a proxy that demonstrates.
I suggest that your investment in my questions is substantially lower than John's effort to find them and get a market going.
I'm just pointing out that the two of you are saying something different.
Yeah, we are. It's a different tool to the same goal. I think your investment in again, you change tools to beat down that top risk according to where you are in the process. If you validate there's a problem space and you want to validate that someone will pay you for it, those are not the same problem. I don't think that either are wrong. It's just how much information you have. And if you want to, I'm suggesting a smaller iteration to take out a whole bunch of risk before you go make an investment in trying to create a community and a product and some service.
So there are two different parts of the puzzle that are slightly different apart in time. Yes. So the first question is, are there a group of people that have as a top 1, 2, or 3 problem for them, the problem that you think they have? So I'm going to go talk to doctors, and I'm going to listen deeply to doctors and try to understand what they perceive their top 3 problems, or what the goals that they have and where they're not making progress on the goals the way they want to make progress on the goals. So that's me learning what they care about. And then once I know that they think that this is a problem for them, I want to know whether or not they are early adopters. And so that's question number 2. So you have the problem, you have the problem. Question number 5 in that cycle is, are you willing to spend money to solve the problem? And so you ask them to spend money to do a proxy for, will you solve the problem?
Oh, thank you, John. That is the best description I've heard of these. It's a little bit temporal. You have to define the problem. Then you're going to test your solution. The second part is testing the solution. No?
No, I'm not solving that problem yet. I'm not testing.
Okay, good. I'm glad I said that then. So keep talking about what you're doing.
If you are. So in that curve that Patrick had of the early adopters, the innovators are never your customer unless you're building kits or you're building shovels, because they're the ones that will do it themselves. Mm-hmm. The early adopters are the ones that will move because they're motivated to move. And then the normal people are going to wait for the gateway adopters to take it before they move. So everything that's the early normal group and later are not your customers either, but they may have the problem. They may understand that it's a barrier, but they're not willing to take action on it until it's been validated. And validated means Fred over there is the guy that did it first, and he always does it first. And I believe when he does it, everything's better. So when he does it, I'll do it. And they'll have wonderful 2.5-year conversations with you, and they won't write a check. So you want to find the person.
Go back to describing the proxy experiment again.
Say it again.
Go back to, so I'm with you. I need to distinguish between the thing that you add that's special is that you believe, and I'm trying, and I believe too, I'm just trying to figure out how to do it, is the proxy experiment, where you go demonstrate, they will pay for your solution before you have your solution. And I believe you, John. So
They
expound in
won't
your
pay.
stream
We're
of
not
consciousness.
asking them to pay for the solution.
Right. You're not. You're trying to get
We're
them.
not asking. No, you know, there is a point where we can talk about the VIP club and why they should pay ahead of time. But before that, there's still proxies. So if there's a problem and people are aware of that problem, then there's a blogger talking about it somewhere. There's an influencer talking about it somewhere. There's a researcher that wrote a paper about it somewhere. There's something out there. It's not dead silence.
Right.
People know that they're having the problem. If nobody in the world knows that this is their barrier, then you have a research problem where you have to prove that it's something and get people talking about. This is the role of research organizations and the role of nonprofits, is to take a problem that is hidden and make it visible. So perfect place for that. You as a startup don't want to be a nonprofit. You do not want to be a research organization. You want to work on the basis of other people's work. And if you're going to be a research organization, you should go get a PhD, not do a startup, right? Just different roles in the world with different revenue models. Now that you know that there's a problem and you're found a bunch of people that are willing to talk about the problem and they say, yes, I have the problem. Are they early adopters? Now I care about early adopters. Patrick cares about gateway adopters, which I characterize as late early adopters, but nonetheless, in that 2.5 to 5% at the front of the curve that is not the innovators and is not the early normal, there's a group of people who will lean in and spend money to solve the problem. Is there a book? Is there a workshop you could run? Is there a meetup you could run? Could you do a movie and charge people for it? Could you run a conference? Could you run a hackathon? Could you do consulting? All of those are possible before you have even a definition of the solution. Now, once you have some notion about what the solution is, enough to sort of do the paper version of it, you know, a set of cards that emulate what it is that you're doing on a piece of paper with crayons, then you can go to them and you can say, this is what we're planning to build, something like this. Will you be my first customer or my 10th customer? You know, the first 100 customer slots, we will sell at a premium to people who are willing to be co-developers with us. And that's sort of the pre-purchase. Let me buy into the development cycle. And you are probably going to do NRE, non-recurring engineering spend, to be part of that club. And it's going to take us 9 weeks or 9 months or a year to do the alpha build. But you get to be part of that build and tell us what to build first. And you pay money to be part of that build. And that's also a proxy. Because if people want features, but they won't pay for the feature, then they're not early adopters that care about this enough to be the ones you should focus on.
John, is crowdsourcing or crowdfunding category, is that part of the proxy experiment, or can that be part of the proxy experiment?
I don't think so, because I think you need to have some pretty clear understanding of the value of your product that you're producing and a clear path to its production for a crowdsourcing thing to work, right? If you say, I'm going to leap off a cliff and I'm going to build the airplane in the middle of the air, but I don't know what airplanes are, then that starts bordering on fraud in a Kickstarter context, right? Unless you sell the experience of watching me jump off the cliff, you're not selling them the product, right? So I would not sell a product on a crowdfunding or a crowdsourcing platform unless I had clear sight to its production at scale, right? I could see selling the first 100 products to a specific 100 people that you've hunted for with spearfishing, but not a broadcast mechanism. So by the time you start broadcasting, You should be all the way into step 3 and be clear about costs and price and product and production and delivery cycles and insurance and import, export, and all of that business stuff that you don't have to have that in this, are you an early adopter question, or does this paper prototype actually solve your problem? All of that can be done onesie twosie with individuals without doing the crowdfunding, crowdsourcing. And I wouldn't do crowdfunding or crowdsourcing, crowdfunding being equity, crowdsourcing being product. I wouldn't do that until I was somewhere near some notion of product market fit.
So John, can I take a run at answering Deborah's question in a slightly different way? I'm going to try to use some of the metaphors I've developed here. So I have experience in about 20 markets going after the psychographic that thinks this way, that is the guy who takes something that's not baked and bakes it. So he can say, look, I'm ahead of you guys. And so I know how they think. I know how to find them. But what I've found about what they do that I want to pile on John's theme in a slightly different way, before you have to sell them your product or have your product developed, and back to my original is, before you have to make a big bet on the concept, if you validated that this is a top problem for them, then they will take whatever solution looks like it will help them with it. And I think you and I and others have talked about, well, we go to a forum where we help people learn more, and that will find, and they have to pay to be there. They will pay to help them pound on this big issue and make it less. It doesn't have to be your final solution. It just is, to John's point, it's a signal that this is a big enough issue. I'm focused on it, and I will spend some money to make an improvement in this. You don't have to make it go away. You just have to make it better for them or be a contributor to improving and helping them reach their goal. That is the filter that I think he's presenting as that's the signal. Have them write a check for solving that problem. Easy, simple, you don't have to have your whole solution developed. Just the flag that this is an indicator, and they'll spend money on it. I don't know if that helps.
No, it's the right, it's where I was going to ask a follow-up question to John, and you're answering it, but I'm going to go ahead, expound on it. So I was tracking with the, do we understand if we have a problem? And if you do, you'll have lots of influencers, bloggers, and researchers. Okay, so I got the first box. I think there's a problem. I got in my particular field, there's a lot of visibility on this problem, a lot of influencers, bloggers, researchers. Now I'm to the point where I'm ready to go run the proxy experiment. And John, I wrote them down: book, meetup, movie, conference, consulting. I'm grooving with those. I'm grounded in those. The one thing you could tell me, and Patrick's touching on it, can you articulate what the goal of that meetup is? It's not to sell my product or to talk about my product. Talk to me about, okay, I'm going to have this meetup, and in the context of they got a problem and I think I got a solution, what am I trying to get them to experience in that meetup or that conference or that consulting? What am I trying to achieve with that? And I'm going to get them to pay for it, but I want to know what it is I'm delivering there, or what the interaction is that I'm trying to accomplish. Could you
pretend you don't have a product?
Got that?
There is no solution. You do not have a solution. But they do things today, right? There are things that are things you do today to solve the problem. So you could put together a panel of 3 people who have solved it 3 different ways, and you could build the compare and contrast solution of, here's what the problem is, this is why it's a problem. Fred solved it this way, Susan solved it this way, Joe solved it that way, and all of these do this, but none of them do that, right? And you can extract that out of the participants. You don't even have to say it out loud. They'll say it for you, right? And you can create then awareness of the fact that this is an issue, right?
So I'm getting a measurement of people. I'm getting a measurement in something that's real and money that indicates they would pay for a solution, of their interest in buying a solution. I'm getting them to show up because they're so interested in finding a solution that they're showing up to interact with other people like them who are also searching for. And when they put that $10 in for a meetup, they show up on time and they really mean it. They're really interested. And that's what you're looking for, that validation of interest in solving the problem.
And leaning in, yes, the leaning in,
Okay.
yes. So what you do when you do that, and especially when you do that as a series, for example, a bunch of startups are interested in funding and they keep coming to my workshops that I run for the Angel Conference.
Yeah.
And the ones that come regularly and engage and listen and change and build things, they're floating to the top of awareness for the investors that are in the room. Right? We haven't solved their problem. We haven't even told them we would solve their problem, but we're watching the people that are leaning in. Right? And so it's a filter. So we run a workshop. Most of them say mumble good things, but two of them are, you know, leaning in, and they show up at the next meeting and they show up at the next meeting. So you run a series of 4 or 5 of these things, and there's this attraction of, here are some early adopters that really badly want this solved. And then you go, now you know who they are. Now you interview them. Now you find out about their demographics. Now you find out about their psychographics, and you try to model an experiment that says, how do I find 100 of these people? And you're trying to answer the question in customer discovery. How do I get a list of 100 people that share the same problem, who share the same barrier to their goals, and they share the same goals, that are willing to spend money to make that problem different, right? And if those problems are out there and they're intractable, there's almost always mitigation around the edges that are better than what you were doing. And there's almost always technology that's not been applied to this problem. And so you can take that new technology and apply it to a corner, mitigate it, make life a little bit better, and attract an audience that you then swallow the bigger problem. And so it is almost always, you know, it's almost never the case that all these people say this intractable problem is my #1 problem, because they know it's intractable and they're off working on something else, right?
Right. They don't think it can be solved, right? That's why it's intractable, right?
So let's
say it's the landscape, right? Now, the secret for most startups is that there's a problem that is now solvable, that is perceived as being intractable, which you can then solve. And now, instead of a 5 or 10% benefit that you're creating a 1,000% benefit, and you charge them, you know, 100% benefit kind of prices, and you create hundreds of times the value and you get hundreds of times the margin, right?
So John, I have a question specifically. So my startup's trying to solve, more or less trying to solve.
You have to speak louder, Alex.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? No, maybe a little bit. Yeah, so I've heard startups, their solution either provides a vitamin or a painkiller. So it either like, and that's sort of how
it's either nice or it's a have to have.
Yeah.
Right?
So vitamin
things that are optional, you don't have to spend money on, so you don't spend money on it. And things that are have to have, you spend money on it even when you don't want to.
So, but beyond vitamin and painkillers, can you give an example of a startup that's with a salve? Like not a vitamin or a painkiller, but just like is that a viable startup model, or is that not? Has that ever been?
People spend money on things that give them benefit. What is the perceived benefit that they're getting?
So it can just be a
if the benefit is optional, then it's not high enough priority for 75, 80% of the people to change their behavior. So if you're intending to get into a mass market, which is where you get scale, then you have to solve a problem that has non-optional components of some kind. So how would your life be if you had no email?
Probably
It would be quieter, but in the modern world, it is not optional not to have a email. You must have an email to engage in the modern Western world of how we do business, right? So if you can do something that makes that non-optional thing better and take your 5,000 emails today to 5 that you need to pay attention to, people will pay money on that for that thing, right? And we have Superhuman that claims to solve that problem.
So, yeah.
Because it's not optional, you must fix that pain in the ass.
But so using your example of email, I mean, there are free email clients, Gmail being a great example. So I feel like Superhuman doesn't actually have a market because they're asking people to pay for something which is free.
I would tell you that there are bundles of people in my social network that are using Superhuman because they are tired of 50,000 emails that they don't want to pay attention to. And they're paying startup prices for it. So it's moving.
Sorry, when you say startup prices, do you mean cheaper than usual or more expensive?
So I'd like to...
Early adopters will pay more to solve a problem than normal people will pay.
Can I share my example?
You may, please do. What are you going to do next, Tatiana?
Well, we have this digital business card app, and we have this idea that, you know, all these meetings, they happen through Zoom, they happen online, and it would be nice for people to have a business card associated with, you know, their profile. So when you go to online meeting and you see participants, you can quickly see who's who, you know, what positions we have, what we're working on, what kind of startups, and all those details. And Zoom is opening like a marketplace solution, right? When we will allow developers to build their own apps and integrate with Zoom, right? So it seems like a great idea. But then my problem is what kind of validation I can do before we jump in and build this, you know, Zoom integrated, before we integrate our app with Zoom, right? Is it a big problem to solve? Because, you know, sometimes people come to meetings for networking. We are looking maybe for customers.
So there's an inordinately bad behavior among startups around networking. They do not recognize who's in the room. They do not recognize why that person is in the room. They don't know whether or not there's something they can do for that person because they didn't listen enough because they've got their story in their head. So understanding who's in the room is important. Understanding what they need is important. And then doing the follow-up is important. So you go to something like the Angel Conference, or you go to one of these seminars and you've got 100 people in the room. If you're in Zoom, what tool do I have? The only thing I have is to put my LinkedIn into the chat. That's the current best practice that I know of in terms of getting Zoom to share business cards, right? We can pick something else, but most people don't have a profile in wherever. The second best thing is to put in your Twitter address and make sure that your Twitter address links to your LinkedIn address so people can figure out who you are and what you're doing, right? But nonetheless, most people don't do that. Most people don't engage in that, and they don't keep a CRM of what they're doing, and they don't sort and take post-event activity on where should I do something for someone, right? And the salespeople know how to do that, and they do an okay job of it. And then there's like 2 out of 100 that actually do a great job of that and end up having lots of connections, know where people are, sort people in, and do what they need to do with each of the different groups of people. So business card exchanges are not enough. You have to change people's behavior. So what would it take to get everybody on this call to know the contact information of everybody else on this call?
Well, the idea was that, you know, you can quickly see, you know, who everybody is and connect immediately during the call.
Yeah, so how would you do that now? How would you do it by hand?
Well, by hand, I guess you would you do private messages or exactly what you discussed.
You would have the facilitator say, okay, those of you that want to be findable, put your LinkedIn into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we currently do. We do that regularly at Open Coffee. We now have a habit at Open Coffee that people start doing that. At the 601 Club, they do the same thing. So there's this developing habit of putting in contact information. Where are people findable? Where do people have existing profiles? Name 3 places other than LinkedIn.
Maybe meetup.com. You checked who joined the meeting, who attended to the meeting.
But I can't find on meetup.com connections to you, Sander.
No.
I don't know your email. I don't know your Twitter. Doesn't have enough information.
Look
right?
for LinkedIn. That's what I did, trying to look up on LinkedIn.
So John Smith has a hard time.
Yes. It's not perfect, but sometimes it's working.
Yeah. So it would be useful to be able to manage that more aggressively and build that. And there are probably dozens of LinkedIn replacements that are under development in various ways. But you need to find a place where people are willing to put their profile and then filter it in some way, right? Create that sense of filtering, right? And we're now getting to the point where people are spending money on LinkedIn enough that LinkedIn is starting to be a pain in the ass because you're getting all these cold emails from people that don't know anything about you. And so that's not working very well. And so because Microsoft bought this and because Microsoft opened the door, they just diminished the value of LinkedIn. And so it's going to drop off here in a little bit. And one of these other ones is going to get a foothold and go above it. But what's the mechanism by which people can find each other? When we were in person in the Open Coffee, we would do the LinkedIn thing where you find everybody that's within 50 feet, find nearby. So what you really want right now is a find nearby button where you could click a button and everybody who's in this group would then show up on the list and automatically be downloaded into your CRM and automatically sorted based on a bunch of things. And so I could easily see a Zapier solution where you glue a bunch of this and a bunch of that together and turn that into a tool and run that experiment, right? So clearly nobody in the room wants to be known by anybody else because only Alex and I have put our LinkedIn. That's the problem. So Tatiana, what are you going to do next in your experiments?
That's very good.
What's your greatest risk? The greatest risk. Patrick, can you go to the 6 risks, please?
Sure. So value. Well, yeah. Why don't I even do this? Why don't I? Yeah, I'll go to the. Let me go to the right page. This is the right list. Yes, that's my favorite version of them.
So Patrick, how would you walk Tatiana through her, I have this idea and I think I need to build something problem, and there's these 6 risks problem, and how would you help her decide what would be next?
I would jump into what I've heard, and maybe I just don't understand, is I haven't understood the value prop that she's providing. I've heard a lot about what she does. Like she's talked about the mechanics of what she is, but I'm not clear on the goal she's helping me achieve with the product she's offering. And so I would want to understand that value and get that really clear so that it could be validated whether it's one of the top 3 things that matter to people who are sitting on Zoom. I am sure it can do what she says it is, but I'm not sure what it's actually doing for someone.
The goal is kind of give you ability to connect with people who you're interested in during online meeting.
So you're trying to do a side chat? You're in a meeting and you want to pull somebody out of the meeting and have a conversation?
You're at the meeting, but often you don't know who are other people at the meeting. When you can see, business card of each person, you would know who would be the right person to talk to, and maybe connect and have
during the I'm talking about timing, and maybe our connection's poor. I'm trying to understand if you're trying to find someone to have a conversation with during the meeting you're in, or as a follow-up conversation after the meeting is over.
As a follow-up conversation. So basically, it's very similar to offline events. You mingle with people, you go back home with a bunch of business cards or connections. And I think that this is missing in online meetings.
You want to be able to find
the right people in the room, the right people at the meeting to have a follow-up or to connect with.
Why would I want to do that? Tell me why. That's a very amorphous to me. I don't really understand. Sure, I could walk into a room where there's 100 people in the room, and somewhere in that meeting there would be somebody I'd like to talk to. It's not going to happen, right? I don't quite understand. You want to find in a forum who's the most likely person I would want to have a follow-up conversation with, even if we didn't have one in the meeting.
Yeah, like for example, let's say you're looking for potential customers, right? And you're attending a call. Oh God, you're looking for potential customers. The microphone. Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're looking for potential customers at the meeting, right? You're attending an industry-specific conference, right? People talking about the problem, and you want to know who the right people for you to follow up, to connect with, to maybe to sell your product or services.
So this is a lead generation. This is a lead gen and lead qualifying exercise.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or let's say you sell, I don't know, development team services, right? And you see a bunch of startup founders and you think some of them may be interested in your service, right? You need to find those people after the conference and ask them and maybe have a follow-up.
You think that the people, no, just a second, I want to go back to the lead generation scenario. I don't want to get sidetracked yet. Why in the people, there's people who want to do lead generation, surely. That's people using LinkedIn and all the other tools to go find and find somebody. But do you think that other people want to be found? I think this is back to John's earlier concept of you've got a two-sided market here. Are there people who join meetings online who definitely want to be found by people who think they might be a lead? Because it's a lot of work to be found, especially if they don't want to be found.
Well, I think it depends.
You have to ask the people who show up to meetings. Yeah, you have to ask the people who are participating in the meeting, do you want to be found if someone wants to sell you something? Because you have to invest in building a card or posting a card in order to make that happen. I'm not sure that that's a top 3 thing that people care about. That's my concern. Let's put it that way.
So we have evidence from another context. When you go to Remo, which is the tool we're using for the Angel Conference, about workshops which allow us to mingle, they have a business card view where you can point at each person and it'll show you their website and their LinkedIn site and a and their job title and allow you to schedule their calendar and make a meeting with them, which is perfectly good for what you're talking about, of which 80% of the people at our conferences don't fill that out, even when asked to fill that out.
Yep.
And so the work that you're talking about has a really significant consumer behavior change. And on the other hand, it's already a feature of Remo. So if it became a feature of Zoom, if Zoom just put it into their product, then all of a sudden you're at substantial risk, right? Because then no matter what you did, Zoom would just use their own, right? And so I see here Harm asking, how would you do the interfaces with Zoom? And by the way, I have a spreadsheet of over 100 video platforms. So we could talk about Teams, we could talk about Meetup, we could talk about all these different things. He's asking the technical question, but what's the user behavior question that would validate that people are willing to do that? I think maybe we've overloaded things and she needs to think.
No. No. So basically, no, I got it. So you're saying even if when people do have all the tools, we don't fill out their profile, right? That's the problem.
Not only is that true.
It reminds me a lot of early CRM, to be frank.
Conference. Right, exactly.
Sorry, John.
No, I mean, not only is it true for the Angel Conference, it's also true for the investors.
It reminds me of experience. Sorry, John, we're crossing each other because of lag. Apologies.
Yeah, you seem to have some lag, or I have some lag. Anyway, you should take the lead, Patrick, and do one more example, and then we should call this done.
Okay. Let me offer, so an observation. I'm going to kill my video just because maybe that's if it's my problem. So the two-sided exchange that you're speaking of reminds me of my early days working on CRM products, where salespeople were being asked to fill out and use apps, just like I think you want people to attend meetings to fill out information. And the benefit was not for them. Salespeople said, look, you're taking away from my selling efforts. This isn't helping my selling at all. It helps you write reports. And in this case, so it was largely rejected for a long time because you couldn't get good data. It was always bad information. CRM systems were really, a whole bunch of them got canned after years of use because they just weren't valuable because people who had to put data in didn't. And it's because it didn't have enough value for a salesperson to help them do his job. Now they've adjusted to that because the decision maker who wanted the data, bought it and put it out there. They wanted to write reports. And in your case, you have people who want to generate leads, but the people on the other end of this equation, there's not enough benefit for them to actually fill that out per the point that John is saying, where they're available and asked, they don't do it. It's not worth it. What's the benefit? What's not enough benefit for them to do it? There was, they'd fill it out, and there's not. So that's the scar tissue old man story that I see a parallel. So the value that let me do a summary of the Top Risk Now model and how I think about it and how it's been used and how it's been successful. There's awareness that there are multiple risk dimensions and you need to think about them because each of them can possibly kill you and kill your project. And having that awareness is super valuable. You're no longer ignorant to the fact that there are other things that can do you in and that you need tools to mitigate them, the specialty tools. So you need to, if you want to be successful, You need to have something in your toolbox to help you mitigate those risks. And you might have multiple tools in each, but you need something so that when it's the big risk, you need to do something about it. Choosing which risk you want to focus on is not a science for a startup. It's but the most important aspect is you don't work on the low ones. You don't waste your energy working on the ones you know are not top ones. You can usually take this 6 and whittle it down to 1 or 2, and at least work on the ones you think is big and constantly assess on whether the other one might be bigger if you pick between them. So it's about triage. It's about having the right tool for the biggest risk. And it's about acting on that risk and realizing you're trying to get a benefit for the least amount of investment to mitigate that risk. And we've spent some time talking about, I think with Deborah's questioning, the fact that you can sequence what you do and get lots of benefit quickly without big investments and without even having a product, to get down to understand, at least in the value space. And what I think is the big gate to success is establishing whether somebody somewhere will write a check to make that problem go away, and that you're a reasonable solution to that compared to their alternatives. And that's what the value pillar is all about. And that's where I tend to start, because if you can't do that, none of the other stuff really matters much. But once you get through it and you get it down to, you know, again, don't have to make it 0. You don't have to have somebody write you a check for your product. You just mitigate it to the point that you can move on and start thinking about the other risks, whether it's about resources or team or often usability. Can you get the value? You can move on to those other layers once you decide, hey, this is a big enough problem and we can actually, the people will pay us to do something about it. I know the market and I know the decision maker who's going to write the check. Those are the big changes that I see happen when you think about these different dimensions. Otherwise, any questions?
I have one question. Usually we are talking about making small steps and checking people's needs. But we have classic big examples in the past. For example, the car, when nobody wanted the car and still nowadays everybody's using it. I know it's a really big thing, but there are examples like this nowadays.
There is. I don't think that that's. I know people like those kinds of things, and I just am stunned by them. Sorry. People have a hard time getting where they want to go, right? Where you say, I have a goal. My goal is to get where I want to go as fast as I can. Do people have a problem with that? Sure, they do. And so they don't have to know your solution. I totally agree with that. But you need to validate that somebody will write a check to get somewhere faster. That's what we're validating at that level in the first step. Not that you have the right solution yet, or that your solution, you need to know that your solution is better than their alternatives, but they have a problem. They want to get somewhere. You have to abstract it up to what are their goals and what's getting in their way. And a horse and carriage is not, if you have a way to get somewhere quicker that doesn't involve a horse and carriage, you've got a solution. You don't have to have them tell you that's what they want. You just have to know they have a goal and they got a barrier to get there, and feeding it and taking care of it and have it go slow is not getting what they'd like to go.
Thank you.
I had a
So Patrick, question. We're gonna, oh, go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so about the low cost experiment to assess whether people will pay for it. What do you guys feel about just putting up a website that says, hey, I'm building this. Give me, if you guys are interested, give me your email. I know that's not it's not money, but it is an email. And I guess, yeah, basically, and also I was thinking about time is money. So if someone comes to a meetup, even though they didn't pay, the fact that they were willing to give their time is kind of a thing. So I guess what are your thoughts on using something that isn't they're not paying you money right away because you don't have something, but they're giving you your email or their time. Oh, no.
You just said, I don't have something, which is the indicator that you have your mind on a product. You're trying to get to, are these people willing to spend money to solve their problem? nothing to do with the product. So you can charge them for proving that you can help them a little bit in some way. And if you're a programmer, it's really hard to automate things you don't know how to do by hand. So you can do a few of them by hand. You want commitment. An email is a much lighter commitment than time, is a much lighter commitment than a phone number, is a much lighter commitment than, you know, we would like you to pay money, because a little bit of money makes the brain twitch in a different way than giving a phone number. Your goal is to get a room full of people that you can easily identify, where you have a conversion rate of 40 to 50% when you offer them the solution. So you're filtering. So having higher filters is not a bad thing.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, I could even maybe offer to put, I mean, maybe I could do it manually, like put it in your forum for you, get it out of Slack, put it in your forum or something. But yeah, I'll think about that more. I get what you're saying though.
If you wrote instructions to a bunch of Filipinas that do work, you give them specific instructions, and they can manage on the order of 100 or 1,000 customers by hand by doing that. That's how the tool Aardvark was run, right? They put people in the middle. It's called the man in the middle experiment. So you put up a web page, you pretend like it's thing, but functionally it's a form. It sends an email to a Filipina. She types it into the database, throws away the bad ones, cleans up the data, and then sends them an email back with the results, right? Or whatever. However you want to build the thing. But the man in the middle is one of the experiments. You might look at the Startup Real book by Tristan Cromer.
Awesome.
Patrick, you have a follow-on that you're doing. When will that be, and what is the title?
Yeah, our next, we're going to do it in this. You've invited me to do this in the next forum, and let me jump down. Our core issue is much of what we've been debating, and it's, you know, pivot to engaging the right person. Like, who do you engage to do this validation, and talking about this value risk. So I'm going to lay out strategies for mitigating that value risk to understand who you engage depending upon the stage. We're going to address that issue that we always bounce back and forth on when is it good to do the early adopter? When is it to engage the gateway adopter? When do you do it? Why are you doing it? How do you do it? And so we'll dive into the market selection and persona selection depending upon the risk type that you're trying to mitigate. On December 11th, is that correct? I think it is.
Yes. And
Yeah.
and I will put it into the meetup group.
And if anybody wants to reach out in the meantime,
to get it there.
Yep.
So thank you for coming. I hope this was useful. If you have comments, please send them in. We will be turning this into a video, and so that video will end up on the YouTube channel for Seattle Angel. And if you see ways that we can help you get connected to resources, please ask. And we do not have one scheduled for next week. Two of my speakers that I had scheduled failed, so I will get the next ones up into the group here in a little bit. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Will we have access to the recording for this session? A link for it?
It'll end up on the YouTube channel after I get some bumpers on it.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Patrick. That was a great presentation. Thank you, John.
Thank you much.